But the massive story that's breaking at the moment that could have huge repercussions for the world and indeed India, the Supreme Court of the United States has just a short while ago ruled against President Donald Trump's powers to impose tariffs, declaring that his use of this emergency authority was illegal and unlawful. The US Supreme Court, in a 6-3 verdict, so a fairly comprehensive verdict, has held that Trump's aggressive approach to tariffs on products entering the United States from across the world was not permitted under a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Joining me now is Rohit Sharma, joins me from Washington, D.C. Anisha Mathur joins us here. She tracks the courts here. But I want to go to you, Rohit, first. This is a major setback to Donald Trump, who over the last 9 months has weaponized tariffs, including against India. What are Trump's options now that the court has ruled against him?
Well, President Trump has two options, Rajdeep. I mean, this is definitely a major setback for the president, who actually wanted the Supreme Court to uphold his executive order, which they did not. It was kind of given after we heard the arguments back in November. So I think President Trump was trying, and he knew that this could happen. We have Senator Lindsey Graham, who's championed a bill in the Congress, in the Senate that has about 80 co-sponsors. So I think that would be his default option. Now Lindsey Graham in this case, could actually table that in Senate, get it passed, push it to House, and then make it legal. So that's number one. The other option that President Trump has is the Section 232 tariffs of the Trade Expansion Act. But this is limited in terms that he could only do this for 6 months. So we'll have to wait and watch what President Trump does. He was supposed to get into a meeting. He was supposed to actually do a press pool spray with governors. But as soon as the news broke out, everybody was ushered out of the room, the press, I mean. And I think the White House is currently huddling to see what would they do next. But this is definitely a major setback. And in terms of what impacts it would have on other countries, look, the countries that have already negotiated a trade agreement, including India, I don't think there would be any, repercussions or consequences of that. I think those deals will stay as it is. I don't think anybody would like to upset President Trump. The only, outlier is European Union, and they have not signed a deal with President Trump. And I think that would be another major setback if European Union wants to weaponize this and try to, do another set of negotiation based on this ruling.
But what happens to the existing tariffs? For example, with India at the moment, the tariffs do still remain, as we speak, at 25%. There was, of course, the additional 25% tariff that he imposed on oil purchases from Russia. Does all that go as of tonight, or is that still on paper there until such time as the Senate decides next? What happens to actually, in legal terms, to the tariffs as we speak today?
So technically, two things, Razi. First, yes, according to Supreme Court, the president did not have authority to do that. So yes, on paper, maybe they're not legal anymore, right? So there shouldn't be any. The other thing, and this gets really complicated here, is Supreme Court did not address the question that President Trump really wanted to have answered, which was, okay, you can turn it illegal if you think this is not right. But what about the money US has collected, the tariff money US has collected in the last 10 months or so? And they've left it out of the opinion. They have not ruled anything on that. And this is where I think it's going to get a little interesting. There are people who are trying to understand and decode what happens with that. But for now, in legal terms, they've vacated that, meaning essentially, there is not going to be any tariffs. They have not ruled on what happens as to with the tariffs in terms of, do they stay? Does President Trump come out and do another executive order?
No, so do we go back? Do we go back to? No, do we go back to pre-April 1, pre the so-called Liberation Day? Are tariffs back at those rates?
According to this ruling, that is the assumption that this is where it stands. But we'll have to wait and watch. I mean, it's a 170-page long opinion, Rajdeep. It's pretty complicated in that sense also. So we'll have to understand. But now, meaning from now on forward, what we can definitely say is President Trump cannot issue another set or slap more tariffs on anybody using an executive order. That is there. Now, what happens previously? Do we go back to before April 1st? I think we'll have to wait and read and understand and break it down from the very, very interesting language that the Supreme Court has used in its 170-page opinion.
I want to go to Anisha Mathur also. Anisha, have you looked at this tariff law and the way it operates? If this is a 6-3 verdict, the key question is whether it has any retrospective effect in terms of the tariffs that existed between April and February. Do we go back to a pre-April situation? Donald Trump could technically go to the Senate and try and push these tariffs through the Senate now.
Well, Rajdeep, to answer that question is going to take a lot more insight into the US law. But what we can tell you right now from reading this 170-page verdict is that the court of the US Supreme Court, in its majority verdict, has gone into the interpretation of IEEPA and the power of the president alone. They have not gone into the issue of refunds. They have not gone into the issue of what effect it will have with the foreign affairs and the various agreements. In fact, the dissenting opinion by Justice Kavanaugh has in fact noted this point, that the interim effects of the court's decisions could be substantial. But as far as the majority opinion is concerned, Rajdeep, all I can tell you is that they have gone on the interpretation, and only the interpretation of the IEEPA, saying that since the Congress did not specifically confer this power on the president could not have imposed unilateral tariffs, that the president does not have the power to impose such tariffs during peacetime, even if the US government had argued that the wartime emergency powers allows the president to take such unilateral action. So as our colleague was also saying, Rajdeep, we'll have to see how this pans out in the next few days, because the question of whether the tariffs already collected would have to be refunded, what impact it will have on the foreign affairs, what impact it will have on the agreements that the US government has inked with various governments, including our government. All of that we'll have to wait and see what the next step is, because this is something that the dissenting opinion has flagged, that it could have a cascading effect.
I just want to I want to go now to guests who are joining me from New York and Washington. Leigh Locker is joining me from Washington, D.C. Daniel Block, Senior Editor Foreign Affairs, is joining me from New York. Daniel, we've had you before on the show, and it appears at the moment that with these tariffs being ruled illegal, what are Donald Trump's options now? There are lots of questions over what happens to the existing tariff structure that he's put in place. Does that go away overnight, or can he go to the Senate?
Well, I think there's a few things that Trump can try to do and probably will do. It's worth saying that none of them are going to be easy or clean replacements for the tariffs. He can try and go to Congress, to the Senate and the House. I think he's going to have a tremendous amount of trouble. In fact, I'm confident saying he will not be able to replicate this tariff regime by going through Congress. There's too much opposition there. The process would be too legislatively difficult. Maybe they will sign off on some tariffs on some countries, but the broad sweeping tariffs that he implemented through this law, he will not be able to get anything like that through Congress. Now, there are other acts that the White House thinks it can use to recreate some of these tariffs. So they may try and unilaterally recreate this tariff regime under other authorities, but it's really unclear whether they'll be able to do that as well. I mean, there's a reason they went to this law first, to try and create their sweeping tariff regime. They don't see the other laws as providing the same degree of flexibility, and they could do that, and the Supreme Court could again strike it down. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up seeing a kind of cat and mouse game where the White House tries going to other laws in order to impose tariffs on various countries, and then the Supreme Court again steps in and says no. That said, again, I think they will struggle to recreate this tariff regime. It's a huge loss. And of note, it's really the first time that we've seen this Supreme Court, which has been generally quite friendly to Trump, step in and say, this is something that you can't do. This is an instance where you've gone beyond your powers and beyond your authority.
Very, very interesting. Leigh Locker joining me from Washington, D.C. Has America been caught a bit by surprise? There are those who tell me, why did it take so long for the courts to decide on it? Others who are saying better late than never. What's the general mood or sense that you think how will Washington see this, particularly the U.S. Congress?
Well, Congress now has no incentive to support any kind of tariff that Trump tries to ram through. The court has ruled. People have been waiting for this for months, for the court to issue its opinion. They assumed that it was going to be the tariffs were going to be thrown out, even with the 6-3, Republican appointed majority, and 3 of these justices being Trump appointees. People assume that just on the face of it, these things were illegal, and that has been proven true. Plus, we had economic growth numbers come out. The economy only grew 2.2% in 2025, in large part because of tariffs. So why would you want to support something that's proven to be a downer in terms of economic growth? And Trump has been weakening politically, over the last few months. We saw it in the November elections where Democrats won by wide margins. We're seeing it in special elections. There's not a lot of people who want to go out on a limb for Donald Trump right now. And the fact that there's a 6-3 majority against him on the tariffs is very telling, since he stacked this court with 3 of his own people, and 2 of them, Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, ruled against him.
So, but is he still spoiling for a fight? I mean, it's ironic that all of this is coming where all the attention in the last few days has been about U.S. Preparing possibly to strike at Iran. Along comes a strike now from the Supreme Court aimed at Donald Trump. Is he spoiling for a fight? Will he look for a weapon of mass distraction, possibly Iran? Or do you believe that at the moment, do you think he can really confront the Supreme Court?
He'll try. He's always spoiling for a fight. Haven't you been paying attention for the last 10 years? That's how he operates. He's always looking for a fight. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if planes were in the air over Iran right now because of this. You have the Epstein files with all that. You have this bogus board of peace in which he's shaking down foreign countries for money to do something in Gaza, which may never happen. Remember, this is a guy who is a 34-time convicted felon, okay? He lies as routinely as he breathes. He's crazy. He falls asleep. What do you expect from him? I mean, so there's not going to be a normal reaction. It's not like, oh, George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush or Ronald Reagan would get a ruling like this and say, what is the prudent thing to do? It's not how he operates. So we're not going to see something that makes sense. He's going to lash out against people, probably put some crazy social post on at 1 a.m. saying he's going to do something. I mean, it's anyone's guess. The one thing that I wouldn't do if I'm another country is rush to the negotiating table to deal with him on trade. You already know that the court says what he's doing is illegal.
That's the question. Geeta Mohan, our diplomatic affairs editor, joins us. Geeta, presumably the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Commerce may well heave a sigh of relief at one level, but it also leads to uncertainty now over what happens next. The trade deal hasn't been signed. Trade negotiators are there in Washington, and lo and behold, suddenly tariffs are no longer on the table. So there is an element of uncertainty that will once again crop up, and who knows, as Ray just suggested, what Donald Trump does next?
Well, Rajdeep, I agree with Daniel and Ray completely in terms of the fact that they use IEEPA first, because that was maybe the only big option that they had in order to carry out the tariffs or weaponizing the tariffs in the manner in which Trump administration did. Having said that, we first have to wait to see, like Daniel said, there are other options that Trump administration will explore. It might go to court again, but it's again a very long, tedious process. No country would want to wait and have additional tariffs imposed on it just to see what the Supreme Court of the United States of America is going to do. In diplomacy, we'll be looking at many countries who are engaging the U.S. administration, whether it's because of the weaponization of tariffs and the impact of that, or what the Trump administration can do should they not go ahead with the conversations that they are having at this point in time. So I don't think New Delhi is looking at this as a breather as much as the companies and businesses in America are looking at the decision as a breather. So it's politically more important and comes out as a breather for Americans rather than looking outward to other countries, because most of the countries, we just interviewed President Lula of Brazil, and he said no matter what, Trump is
the most powerful leader in the world, whether if he does something or doesn't do. And he's headed to Washington, D.C., despite the kind of acrimonious relationship the two leaders have had. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have engaged as well. So most countries are going to look at trade as a bilateral issue, and that will have to be dealt with bilaterally. That's the sense I get. This is a setback for Trump, but it's a domestic setback more
Right.
than anything else at this point in time.
Daniel, do you agree with that, that it's a domestic setback? Because lots of countries have been pushing in because of the weaponization of tariffs to sign bilateral trade deals. Some sign, for example, India's with the EU. But the question is what happens to deals which are still in the making, like India and the United States? We don't know about that. Do you believe that the uncertainty will remain until we know what Donald Trump wants to do next? Because he likes to be in the headlines. He's determined in a way to almost spoil for a fight in some form or the other.
Yeah, I'd say right now the domestic consequences are a little bit more predictable than the international ones because, as Geeta said, there's so much uncertainty about what's going to happen with all these deals, with relations with other countries. I mean, I've seen a great deal of caution coming from other countries so far about the ruling. Granted, the ruling just came out, so it's still early, but other countries' trade councils, I think they're rightfully expressing a degree of caution and uncertainty about this because it really is unclear what Trump is going to do next. I do not think he is going to go gently on this issue. That's just not his style. That's not how he operates. I do think that there's probably a good deal of celebration happening in some foreign capitals, and rightfully so. But domestically, yeah, it's clear in that it's a huge domestic defeat for Trump. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a possible silver lining here domestically for Trump as well, which is that the tariffs were, by most accounts, not good for the U.S. economy. They were causing some inflation. And so now they're gone. So you could paradoxically have a situation where this, even as it's a big political defeat for Trump, helps his approval ratings in some way because it improves the economic standing of ordinary Americans. Now that's looking several, steps down the road, so who knows if that will really happen. But there is a possible silver lining here for him as well.
What we're seeing is U.S. stocks are already up, and there's a sense that they could have a very strong recovery, particularly those stocks which were hit by the uncertainty that the tariff regime provoked. A final word from you, Ray. It's impossible to crystal gaze with Donald Trump. You just don't know what will happen next. But do you see him, as I said at the outset, doing something dramatic to shift attention from this domestic loss of sorts or a loss of face?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know what it could be, but that's how he operates. And I don't even know if he does that consciously. I think he just goes from one thing to another because that's just the way he thinks. So it could be anything. I wouldn't be resting easily if I was in Tehran right now because he might want to do something big there. He's been steadily inching toward that, moving ships closer and closer in the Persian Gulf. So maybe we see something there, or maybe we don't see anything. It's just hard to say.
Right. Well, I'm going to leave it there. We're waiting to see how this plays out at the moment, waiting for an official comment from the White House. None has come. Donald Trump silent, no comments at the moment from Truth Social. But you could expect something or the other from the Trump administration to what's been a major setback to what Donald Trump has attempted, disrupted world economies. Tariffs ruled illegal 6-3 by the U.S. Supreme Court.